Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. We love to get our hands dirty with the real nitty-gritty of safety regulations. And today we're going vertical, talking tower cranes, and specifically those regulations that keep them from, tipping over, crushing things, generally causing mayhem.
Yeah, those things are no joke.
Right. So this one's for all you safety pros out there, crane operators, and anyone thinking about getting that operator's license. We're cracking open OSHA's 1926.1435 standard, which, let's be honest, doesn't exactly sound like a page turner.
It's not exactly light reading.
And here's the thing. These regulations are way more interesting than they might seem at first glance.
Right? Absolutely. I mean, you're talking about these massive machines operating at incredible heights with, the power to lift tons and tons of material. There's no room for error. And that's where OSHA steps in, trying to make sure those margins of safety are as wide as possible.
Exactly. We're talking about machines that could literally reshape a city skyline or, on a bad day, reshape it in a way no one intended.
Yeah, not a good day.
So where do we even begin with something this complex? I mean, these regulations cover everything from the crane's foundation to the tip of the boom.
Well, the standard wisely focuses on those phases where the risks are highest. Erecting, climbing. And dismantling OSHA's got those covered in standards, 1926.1403 through 1926.1406. Think about it. You're literally assembling and disassembling a giant puzzle, hundreds of feet in the air.
That's a pretty high-stakes puzzle.
No kidding. And the instructions. Those manufacturer instructions become your absolute Bible during these phases. You deviate from those. You're asking for trouble.
And I bet having a competent person overseeing everything, making sure every bolt is tightened, every procedure is followed, that's got to be non-negotiable.
Right, absolutely. It's like having an orchestra conductor making sure every instrument is playing in tune. Except in this case, the music is a perfectly executed construction project, and the instruments are tons of steel moving through the air.
Yeah, the stakes are a little higher if someone hits a wrong note in this orchestra.
You could say that.
Now, before we even get to the puzzle pieces in the sky, let's talk about the foundation. Those foundations and structural supports, they have to be rock solid.
Right. They are literally the bedrock of the entire operation.
Yep.
OSHA doesn't mess around here. Those designs, they have to come from either the crane manufacturer themselves or a registered professional engineer, someone who really knows their stuff.
So, no cutting corners on those calculations.
Absolutely not. We're talking about forces that could topple a building if they're not properly managed. So you need that stamp of approval from someone who's qualified to make those calls.
Makes sense. You can't just eyeball it when you're dealing with that kind of weight and stress.
Yeah.
Now, OSHA also gets into a lot of specific hazards.
Right. Oh, yeah. Standards 1926.1404 1 through 9. They go into all sorts of potential dangers. But for now, let's focus on a few that are especially important for the assembly-disassembly director. We usually just call them the AD director.
Okay, the AD director.
Yeah.
Got it. So what are some of those hazards that keep those folks up at night?
Well, one of the biggest ones is loss of backward stability. Imagine the crane lifting a heavy load, and suddenly it starts tipping backward.
I'm getting a mental image, and it's not pretty.
It's a nightmare scenario, especially for those self-erecting cranes or the ones on those traveling undercarriages. They're more susceptible to that kind of instability.
Yeah. And then you've got wind. Wind's got to be a huge factor at those heights.
Absolutely. Wind can be a silent killer. Especially when you're dealing with something as large as a tower crane, you always have to operate within those wind speed limits set by the manufacturer. And if those aren't specified for some reason, you need a qualified person to assess those wind conditions and make the call. No guesswork allowed.
I guess a stiff breeze at ground level can turn into a hurricane force up there.
Exactly. And then there's something called plumb tolerance, which basically means how straight is that tower during erection?
Plumb tolerance.
Okay. That sounds technical. It is. But it's critical. Think of it like building a skyscraper. Even a slight lean can throw everything off. The general rule is a 1.500 ratio, so roughly an inch of lean for every 40 feet of height, of course. If the manufacturer specifies a different tolerance, you go with their recommendation, always.
So precision is key, even for something that might seem minor, like a little bit of lean.
Every detail matters when you're dealing with these kinds of forces. Now, things get even more interesting when you have multiple cranes operating on the same job site.
Okay, yeah. Now you're talking about a real ballet of giants.
It's a carefully choreographed dance, and OSHA lays down some pretty specific rules to prevent those dancers from bumping into each other. For example, if you have multiple fixed jib cranes, those hammerhead-shaped ones, they can't touch each other's structures. but they are allowed to pass over one another.
Okay, so it's like a carefully planned aerial maneuver.
Exactly. And those climbing procedures, making the crane taller, those get even stricter. The manufacturer's prohibitions are absolute, no exceptions. And on top of that, you need a registered professional engineer to verify the strength of that host structure, the building the crane's attached to, just to make sure it can handle the added stress.
It's like you're building on top of an already tall structure, so any misstep could have major consequences.
You got it. Now, let's talk about those counterweights, those massive blocks that keep the crane from tipping over.
Ah, yes. The balancing act.
Exactly. Those counterweights, or ballast, they're like a tightrope walker's balancing pole. Get the weight wrong, get the position wrong, and the whole thing goes down. The manufacturer or engineer will specify exactly how much weight to use and where to position it, and you never ever exceed that maximum weight.
That's like trying to balance a scale with way too much weight on one side.
It's a recipe for disaster. And OSHA makes it very clear that overloading those counterweights is a huge no-no. It's not a risk worth taking.
Not a risk anyone wants to take. Now, what about signs and safety devices? Those are pretty crucial on any job site.
Right, absolutely. For signs, you got to follow the manufacturer's guidelines on size and placement. If those aren't available, you need a registered professional engineer to sign off on the design. It's all about clarity, making sure those signs are visible and easy to understand.
It's like a universal language on the job site, one that everyone speaks and everyone understands.
Now, safety devices are where things get interesting. OSHA 1926.1415, the standard that covers safety devices for most cranes. Well, it doesn't actually apply to tower cranes.
Really, that's surprising.
Yeah, you'd think those general rules would apply across the board. But tower cranes, they're in a league of their own. Their height, their complexity, they demand specialized safety devices that go beyond the norm.
Okay, so what kind of special features are we talking about here? I'm all ears.
Well, for starters, every tower crane needs boom and jib stops for those luffing booms. The ones that can change angles. Those stops act like brakes, preventing the boom from swinging too far.
So it's like setting boundaries for the crane's arm.
Exactly. Then you've got travel rail end stops and clamps. Those prevent the crane from rolling off the rails, literally keeping it on track.
Okay. Starting to sound like these cranes have more safety features than a spaceship.
And we're just getting started. You also need check valves on those hydraulic cylinders and pressure limiting devices to keep that hydraulic system operating safely. These are like the crane's circulatory system, and you need those checks and balances to make sure the pressure stays within those safe limits.
So it's not just about preventing mechanical failures, it's about preventing those systems from going haywire in the first place.
Exactly. And then there are the brakes. Oh, so many brakes. You need automatic brakes for the hoist, the swing, the trolley, and the rail travel. These kick in automatically if there's a power failure or pressure loss, preventing a runaway situation.
Multiple layers of redundancy, making sure that no matter what goes wrong, the crane stays under control.
You got it. Then you have those dead man controls on those hand levers. So if the operator lets go, everything stops. It's like a built-in safety net. And of course, you have that big emergency stop switch at the operator's station, just in case all else fails. And finally, you need trolley end stops to prevent the trolley from moving too far along the job.
Wow. Sounds like OSHA really thought of everything when it comes to safeguarding these tower cranes.
They did. And here's the kicker. You can't operate a tower crane without all those devices in perfect working order. No exceptions. And using alternative measures, that's a no-go too. OSHA is drawing a line in the sand here.
So it's not just about having those devices, it's about making sure they're maintained and they're ready to do their job at a moment's notice.
Yep.
Now let's talk about operational aids. How are those different from those safety devices?
Operational aids, those are more like support systems that help the operator run the crane safely and efficiently. And here's another interesting thing. OSHA 1926.1416, the standard that covers operational aids for most cranes. It also doesn't apply to tower cranes.
Okay. It's official tower cranes. They play by their own rules.
They do. They have their own set of operational aids, each with its own set of rules and regulations. And OSHA breaks these aids down into two categories, each with different repair timelines. This is where things get a little detailed, so buckle up.
Okay, bring on the details. I'm ready to dive deeper into these operational aids and understand how they fit into that big picture of tower crane safety.
All right, let's start with category operational aids. These are the ones you got to fix within 7 calendar days if they malfunction. We're talking about devices that are crucial for preventing those really big accidents, things like collisions or overloading.
So these are frontline defenses. the ones that need immediate attention if they're not working properly. What kind of devices fall into this category?
Well, for example, you have the trolley travel limiting device that keeps the trolley from slamming into those end stops we talked about. It's all about controlled movement, preventing those sudden jolts that could destabilize the load or damage the crane.
It's like a buffer, a safety margin that keeps things from going too far.
Yeah, exactly. Then you've got that boom hoist limiting device, That one keeps the boom from swinging too far, kind of like setting those boundaries for the crane's arm so it doesn't stray into those restricted areas.
Yeah.
Or worse, hit something it shouldn't.
Right. So those collisions we were talking about before,
Yeah.
This is another layer of protection against those, making sure the crane stays within its designated workspace.
Exactly. And then you have the anti-two blocking device. This one's a real lifesaver. It prevents that load block from slamming into the boom tip. Imagine what would happen if that block hit the tip. You could damage the crane, snap the cable, or even cause the whole boom to buckle. Not good.
Yeah, that sounds pretty catastrophic. It's amazing how these seemingly small devices can play such a huge role in preventing those major accidents.
They really do. They're those unsung heroes of crane safety. Now, for cranes made after November 8th, 2011, there's another important one, the hoist drum, lower limiting device. That one makes sure those last couple of wraps of cable, they stay on the drum, so you don't run out of cable while you're hoisting a load. So it's like a fail-safe for the cable, making sure there's always enough wrapped around the drum to maintain that secure hold.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you have the load moment limiting device. This one's like the crane's guardian against overloading. It's constantly monitoring that way of the load, the boom angle, making sure the crane isn't pushed beyond its limits.
It's like a built-in safety net, preventing those potentially fatal mistakes.
That's a good way to put it. And working alongside that, you have the hoist line pull limiting device, which does the same job, but specifically for the hoist itself. So you're protecting that hoisting mechanism from those excessive forces.
So it's like having a backup for the backup, making sure that even if one system fails, there's another one ready to step in and prevent that overload.
Exactly. Redundancy is key when it comes to safety. Yeah. Now, moving on to the last two devices in this category. You have that rail travel limiting device, which, you guessed it, prevents the crane from going off the rails, keeps it within those designated travel limits.
Okay. Makes sense. So no runaway crane scenarios. Nope, not on our watch. And finally, there's the boom hoist drum positive locking device and control, which basically allows the operator to lock that boom hoist drum right from the cab.
So it's like an extra layer of security, making sure that boom stays put when it needs to.
Exactly. So as you can see, this category it covers a lot of ground. It's all about making sure that crane operates within those safe limits, preventing those big catastrophic failures that could put lives at risk.
Right. And if any of these Category I devices fail, you have 7 days to fix them.
Correct. 7 calendar days. That's right. Unless the employer can prove they ordered those necessary parts within those 7 days, then they get a little more leeway. The repair just needs to be finished within 7 days of getting those parts. It's all about showing that they're not dragging their feet on those repairs.
Makes sense. They need to show they're taking those repairs seriously. So what about Category 3 operational aids? What makes those different?
The main difference is the repair timeline. For these devices, you have a more generous 30 calendar days to get them fixed. They might not be as immediately critical as those Category I devices, but they still need attention to ensure the crane is operating safely and efficiently.
So it's like a preventative maintenance schedule, addressing those potential issues before they become major problems. What kind of devices fall under this Category 2?
Well, one example is the boom angle or hook radius indicator for luffing boom cranes. Those are the ones with the adjustable booms. You need a boom angle indicator. And for those hammerhead cranes with that fixed horizontal job, the ones made after November 8th, 2011, they need a hook radius indicator. Both of these need to be clearly visible from the operator's station.
So these indicators basically tell the operator where the load is in relation to the crane, helping them avoid those close calls and potential collisions.
Exactly. They provide that crucial spatial awareness. Then you have the deceleration devices for trolley travel, the boom hoist, and the load hoist. These are all about smoothness. They automatically slow things down as they approach their limits. So you don't have those sudden jarring movements that could destabilize the load or damage the crane.
Okay, so it's like having a gentle braking system, making those transitions smoother and safer.
Precisely. And of course, you have the wind speed indicator, pretty self-explanatory, and it needs to be mounted up high on the crane so the operator has an accurate reading of those wind conditions, which, as we discussed before, can be a major safety factor.
Especially at those heights, wind can change quickly and unexpectedly. So having that real-time information is essential.
You got it. And finally, for those cranes manufactured after November 8th, 2011, you need a load indicating device. which displays the weight on the hook so the operator knows exactly how much they're lifting.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like having a digital scale built into the crane, providing that constant feedback to keep the operator within those safe operating limits.
Now, if the crane already has a load moment limiting device with a load display, you're good to go. It's all about having that information readily available, preventing those dangerous overloads. So those are the main Category 2 operational aids. And just like with Category I, if one of these malfunctions, there are specific temporary measures you can take while you're waiting for that repair.
So it's all about finding those safe workarounds, maintaining that level of safety even when a device is out of commission. Could you give us some examples of those temporary measures?
Sure. Let's say your boom angle or hook radius indicator is acting up. Well, you'll need to go old school and measure those manually, using a tape measure or a transit. And if a deceleration device is malfunctioning, the employer needs to post a notice in the cab, letting the operator know to be extra careful and operate those controls with a little more finesse, compensating for that missing safety net.
So it's all about adapting, making those adjustments to ensure safety isn't compromised. Now, we've talked a lot about the regulations and the devices, but what about the inspections? How do we make sure these cranes are in tip-top shape and all those safety features are functioning properly?
Great question. Inspections are a huge part of crane safety, and OSHA has specific standards that apply to tower cranes, Standard 1926.1412, which covers inspections for most cranes. What applies here too, but with one small tweak, the word assembly is replaced with erection, recognizing that unique building process of tower cranes, and 1926.1413, which deals with wire rope inspections. That one applies to tower cranes as well.
So it's like taking those general inspection guidelines and tailoring them to the specific needs of tower cranes.
Exactly. Now, before we even think about erecting the crane, we need to do a thorough pre-erection inspection. That's where a qualified person, someone who knows their stuff, goes over every single component with a fine-tooth comb. They're looking for any damage, wear and tear, anything that might compromise the safety of that crane.
Sounds like a pretty meticulous process, leaving no room for error.
It is. And during this inspection, they pay extra attention to those components that'll be hard to reach once the crane is up in the air. Those hidden nooks and crannies that could easily be missed later on. And if they find a component that's damaged, worn out, anything that poses a safety hazard, it's a no-go. That component has to be repaired and re-inspected before it can be used. No exceptions.
So it's about catching those potential problems early on, preventing those catastrophic failures that could happen if a damaged component is put into service.
Exactly. And if they find something that's not an immediate hazard, but maybe something to keep an eye on, they'll document it. Make a note of it for future inspections. It's like creating a watch list for those components that might need attention down the road, so nothing slips through the cracks.
A proactive approach. I like it. So what happens once the crane is erected? Are there more inspections then?
Oh, yeah. In addition to the usual post-assembly inspection requirements, tower cranes have a special post-erection test, a load test using certified weights. This is where we put the crane through its paces, making sure it can handle those loads it's designed to lift.
So it's like a real-world simulation, testing the crane's limits in a controlled environment to make sure it can perform safely under pressure.
You got it. And this test needs to be done according to the manufacturer's instructions, or if those aren't available, a registered professional engineer has to develop those written procedures for the test. Again, it's all about having those expert guidelines in place, ensuring the test is done safely and effectively.
It seems like those qualified professionals are involved in every step of the process, providing that expertise and oversight that's so crucial for safety.
They are. And those monthly inspections, those go beyond the standard checklist too. For tower cranes, you need to check all those tower bolts and other structural bolts, making sure they're nice and tight.
So you're basically checking the crane's skeleton, making sure all those bones are connected and secure.
Exactly. And this inspection, it starts at the base and goes all the way up. Or if the crane's tied to a structure, up to that uppermost brace support, it's a full body checkup for the crane, making sure those critical connections are holding strong.
Wow. It's amazing how each inspection focuses on different aspects of the crane's operation, making sure every component, every connection, every system is thoroughly scrutinized.
It's all about layers of protection, catching those potential problems before they turn into major safety hazards. And in addition to those bolts, you also need to inspect those uppermost tie-ins, the braces, the floor supports, the wedges, anything that connects the crane to the building or structure. These connections are vital for stability, especially during those climbing procedures.
So you're making sure that crane is firmly rooted, preventing any wobbling or swaying that could lead to a disaster.
Exactly. And let's not forget those annual inspections. Those go even deeper. You have to inspect all those turntable and tower bolts, checking their condition, looking for any wear and tear corrosion damage, and making sure they're torqued to the correct specifications. You want to make sure those connections are strong and reliable.
So it's like a combination of visual inspection and technical verification, ensuring those bolts are in top-notch condition. This is incredible. I'm really getting a sense of how much goes into keeping those tower crane operations safe.
It's a lot, but it's all for a good reason. These machines are powerful, and any mistake can have serious consequences. OSHA's goal is to minimize those risks, making sure everyone on that job site goes home safe at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Now, I know we've thrown a lot of information at our listeners today. All these regulations, procedures, inspections, it can be overwhelming.
It can be, but that's why it's so important to break it down, to really understand those core principles behind these regulations and how they translate into real-world actions that prevent accidents.
Right. It's not just about memorizing rules. It's about understanding the why behind those rules and how they shape the decisions an operator makes on the job site, especially for those who are working towards their crane operator license. This knowledge is essential.
Absolutely. Aspiring operators, they need to internalize those principles, understand that rationale, and apply them in a dynamic work environment. It's like learning to drive. You got to know those rules of the road, but you also need to develop those instincts, those judgment calls that keep you safe in real-world traffic.
That's a great analogy. So it's a combination of knowledge, skill, and judgment, all working together to create a safe and efficient operation.
Exactly. And that's where training and mentorship come in, having those experienced guides who can help bridge that gap between theory and practice, guiding those aspiring operators as they develop those essential skills.
Right. It's like having an experienced co-pilot on those first few flights.
Right.
Making sure you're making the right calls and developing those good habits that will keep you safe.
Precisely. And just like with flying, safety is paramount in crane operation. There's no room for complacency, no shortcuts. It's all about vigilance, awareness, and adherence to those established procedures.
We've talked a lot about the mechanical and regulatory aspects of safety. But what about the human element? How do things like fatigue, stress distractions, how do those impact those operators and potentially compromise safety?
That's a huge point. And it's often overlooked. We can have all the safety devices and regulations in the world. But if the operator isn't in the right headspace, if they're tired, stressed, distracted, those safeguards can easily be bypassed.
It's like having a state-of-the-art security system, but leaving the front door unlocked. All those safeguards are useless if the human element isn't taken into account.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to create a work environment that supports those operators, recognizing that they're human beings, not robots. They get tired, they get stressed, they get distracted, just like anyone else. And we need to make sure they have the support and resources they need to perform their job safely.
So it's about creating a culture of safety that goes beyond those rules and regulations. A culture where operators feel comfortable speaking up about their concerns, where they're encouraged to take breaks when needed, and where their well-being is prioritized.
Absolutely. It's a shared responsibility. From the employers to the supervisors to the workers on the ground, we all need to create that safety net for those operators.
So it's a holistic approach, recognizing that safety isn't just a checklist. It's a mindset, a shared responsibility that requires us to address both those mechanical and those human factors.
Well said. Now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about technology. It's a hot topic in the world of crane safety. We've seen those incredible advancements, things like anti-collision systems, data loggers, even remote-controlled cranes. But the question is, are these advancements making things safer, or are they creating new risks?
That's a great question. It seems like we're always walking that tightrope between embracing those innovations and making sure they don't backfire.
And with technology evolving so rapidly, it's crucial to have these conversations, to critically examine those potential benefits and drawbacks.
So let's dive into that world of crane technology, see how it's impacting safety on the job site. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, let's start by acknowledging that technology has the potential to revolutionize crane safety. It can provide those extra layers of protection, automate tasks, give operators more information and control than ever before. But we have to be cautious, recognizing that technology is a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or for bad.
It's like giving someone a chainsaw. It can be incredibly useful for clearing trees, but in the wrong hands, it can be extremely dangerous.
Exactly. We can't just throw some fancy gadgets on a crane and assume everything will be fine. We need to think carefully about how those technologies are integrated, how they impact the operator's role, and how we address those potential risks.
So it's about striking that balance, embracing those innovations while making sure they're implemented in a way that actually enhances safety, not creates new hazards. What are some examples of those crane technologies being used today, and how are they impacting safety?
One of the biggest ones is the anti-collision system. These systems use sensors and software to detect other cranes and structures nearby. And if a collision is imminent, the system can automatically slow down or stop the crane, preventing those potentially devastating impacts.
It's like an invisible shield around the crane, constantly monitoring its surroundings and taking action to prevent those close calls.
And these systems are getting more sophisticated all the time, able to handle those complex scenarios with multiple cranes operating in close proximity. They can even factor in things like wind and load weights, making those real-time calculations that keep those cranes safely apart.
It's amazing how technology can augment those human capabilities, providing that extra layer of awareness and protection. But I have to ask, doesn't this create a potential for complacency on the part of the operator? If they're relying on these systems to prevent collisions, could they become less attentive to their surroundings, more likely to make mistakes?
That's a valid concern, and it's something we need to be very mindful of. Just because a crane has an anti-collision system doesn't mean the operator can check out and rely solely on the technology. In fact, these systems often require even more vigilance from the operator. They need to understand those limitations of the system, monitor its performance, and be ready to take over if necessary.
So it's not about replacing human judgment with technology. It's about augmenting it, providing those extra tools and information to help those operators make better decisions.
Precisely, and that's where training comes in. Operators need to be thoroughly trained on these systems, how they work, what their limitations are, and how to use them effectively as part of a comprehensive safety strategy.
It's like learning to use any new piece of equipment. You need to understand its capabilities and limitations before you can safely and effectively integrate it into your workflow.
Exactly. Another area where technology is making a big impact is in load monitoring. Modern tower cranes often have those load indicating devices we talked about earlier, providing that real-time information about the weight being lifted.
That seems like such crucial information for the operator.
Yeah.
I can imagine how easy it would be to misjudge those loads, especially when you're dealing with those massive weights and heights.
You're right. It's easy to underestimate the weight of a load, especially from a distance. And those old school methods of estimating weight, they're just not reliable enough anymore.
So these load indicating devices, they take the guesswork out of it, providing those accurate readings that help those operators stay within those safe operating limits.
Exactly. And some systems even go a step further, sounding an alarm or cutting off power to the hoist if the load exceeds a certain limit. It's like having an electronic guardian angel watching over the operation.
Wow. It's incredible how technology can provide those real-time safeguards, intervening before a mistake turns into a disaster. What other technological advancements are you seeing in crane safety?
We're also seeing data loggers and telematics systems being used on those tower cranes. These systems collect a ton of data about the crane's operation, things like load weights, operating speeds, even weather conditions, providing those insights that can help us improve safety and efficiency.
It's like having a black box for the crane, recording every movement, every decision. Giving us that data, we need to analyze those operations and identify those areas where we can improve.
That's a great way to think about it. And that data can be used for so many things. We can identify patterns in crane usage, spot those potential issues before they become big problems, and even provide feedback to those operators on their performance, helping them refine their skills and make safer decisions.
So it's not just about reacting to incidents after they happen. It's about using that data to proactively prevent those incidents from happening in the first place.
Absolutely. And this data can also be used to track maintenance needs, making sure that crane is always in top condition, addressing those potential mechanical failures before they turn into safety hazards. It's like having a crystal ball that shows us those problems before they even arise.
It sounds like technology is really changing the way we approach crane safety, giving us those tools and insights we need to create a safer work environment.
It is, but it's important to remember that technology is just one piece of the puzzle. It's not a magic bullet, and it's definitely not a substitute for those well-trained operators, experienced personnel, and a strong safety culture.
Right. It's about integrating those technological advancements into a comprehensive safety strategy, one that recognizes that technology is a tool, not a replacement for human judgment and expertise.
Exactly. And I think we're just scratching the surface of what's possible with crane technology. In the coming years, we're going to see some even more amazing developments. Things like virtual reality simulations for training, drones for inspections, and even AI systems that can predict and prevent accidents.
Wow. The future of crane safety sounds both exciting and a little bit daunting.
It is. But no matter how advanced that technology becomes, we can't forget about those fundamentals. Those OSHA regulations we discussed, those are still the bedrock of safe crane operations.
Right. They provide that essential framework, making sure those technological advancements are implemented responsibly and don't end up compromising safety.
Precisely. And those regulations are always evolving to keep pace with those new challenges and innovations. It's an ongoing process. We have to adapt, refine, and stay ahead of the curve.
So it's a dynamic field, constantly changing. Those involved in crane operations, they need to stay informed, embrace those new technologies, and never lose sight of those fundamental safety principles that protect lives and property.
Well said. And speaking of staying informed, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. It's been a whirlwind tour of tower crane safety. From those regulations to those technologies, it's a lot to digest.
It has been a lot.
Yeah.
But it's been incredibly informative. I think we've all gained a much deeper appreciation for the complexities of crane safety and the dedication of those individuals who work so hard to ensure these operations are conducted safely.
I agree. And before we wrap up, I want to highlight a few key takeaways for our listeners, especially those who are working towards their crane operator license. First and foremost, tower crane safety is a shared responsibility. It's not just on the operator. Everyone on that job site plays a role in preventing accidents.
That's so important. It's about creating that culture where everyone's looking out for each other, recognizing that even those small actions can make a big difference.
Exactly. And another key takeaway, never underestimate the power of communication. Operators, riggers, signal persons. Everyone needs to be on the same page. Clear, concise, timely communication. It's essential for safe crane operations.
Like an orchestra, everyone playing their part in harmony. If one instrument is out of tune, if that communication breaks down, the whole performance falls apart.
Perfect analogy. And
Yeah.
here's another crucial point. Don't be afraid to ask questions. If something doesn't seem right or you're unsure about a procedure, speak up. It's always better to be cautious and clarify those doubts than to make assumptions that could lead to a mistake.
Absolutely. Safety should always come first. And no one should ever feel hesitant to raise a safety concern. It's much better to have those conversations and make sure everyone's on the same page than to let those doubts fester and potentially lead to an accident.
You got it. And finally, remember that safety is an ongoing process. It's not something you achieve overnight. It requires continuous learning improvement and a willingness to adapt to those ever-changing conditions on the job site.
So it's a journey, not a destination. And it's a journey that requires those involved in crane operations to be proactive, engaged, and always striving to improve their knowledge and skills.
That's a great way to put it. It's about embracing that lifelong learning mindset, recognizing that our industry is constantly changing, and those who want to stay ahead of the game, they need to change with it.
This has been a truly insightful conversation. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of this topic, but I'm definitely leaving with a much deeper understanding of the intricacies of crane safety and the importance of those dedicated individuals who work tirelessly to make sure these operations are conducted safely.
I'm glad to hear that. And before we move on, I want to leave our listeners with a question, something to ponder. Given all these regulations, those complexities of crane operation, those evolving technologies, what do you think the future holds for tower crane safety? How do you see this field changing in the years to come?
That's a great question. And I think it's one that deserves some serious thought. As technology keeps advancing, as new materials and construction techniques emerge, as we build taller and more complex structures, how will the world of crane safety keep pace?
It's an exciting time to be in this industry, and I'm eager to see how those innovative minds will shape the future of crane safety, finding those new ways to protect lives and property while pushing those boundaries of what's possible.
This has been an incredibly enlightening deep dive. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
It's been my pleasure. Really enjoyed the conversation.
And to all our listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this journey into the world of tower crane safety. We hope you found it informative and engaging.
Remember, safety is everyone's responsibility. We all have a part to play.
And as always, Safety One Source is here to support you, providing the resources you need to stay safe on the job. Until next time, stay safe out there. Yeah, it really makes you think about how we balance those exciting advancements with those tried and true safety practices. We can't let the allure of shiny new tech overshadow those fundamental principles that have kept us safe for so long.
Absolutely. It's like those self-driving cars. You know, they have amazing potential, but we still need those drivers to stay alert, ready to take over if something goes wrong.
Right. Those crane operators of the future, they'll need to be even more skilled, more adaptable, able to work with those technologies, but also able to step in and take manual control when needed.
Exactly. And that's why training is more important than ever. We need to equip those future operators with the knowledge and skills to navigate this rapidly evolving landscape.
It's about creating a new generation of crane operators who are tech-savvy, safety-conscious, and able to make those split-second decisions when the pressure is on.
And let's not forget those safety professionals. Their role is going to be even more crucial as those technologies advance. They need to stay ahead of the curve, constantly learning and adapting to keep those job sites safe.
So the future of crane safety really hinges on collaboration. Operators, safety professionals, engineers, manufacturers, everyone working together to create a safer, more efficient environment.
Well said. It's about continuous improvement, never settling for good enough. Always striving for that zero-incident goal.
This deep dive has been eye-opening. I feel like we've just scratched the surface. But it's given us a much deeper understanding of the complexities of crane safety and the dedication of those individuals who work so hard to keep these operations running smoothly and safely.
I agree. It's been a great conversation. And before we wrap up, I'd like to leave our listeners with one final thought. Given everything we've discussed, those regulations, those hazards, those emerging technologies, what do you think the future holds for tower crane safety?
It's a fascinating question. As technology continues to evolve at an unprecedented pace, as we continue to push the boundaries of construction, building taller, more complex structures, what new challenges and opportunities will emerge in the realm of crane safety?
I think it's going to be an exciting time to be in this industry. I can't wait to see what those innovative minds come up with, finding new and better ways to protect lives and property while pushing those limits of what's possible.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into the world of tower crane safety. We've covered a lot of ground today. From those meticulous regulations to those cutting-edge technologies, it's been a whirlwind tour. But I think we've all come away with a greater appreciation for the importance of safety in this demanding field.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure joining you today, and I hope our listeners found this conversation informative and insightful.
To all our listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope you learned something new and maybe even found some inspiration to take your safety practices to the next level.
Remember, safety is everyone's responsibility. Let's all do our part to create a safer work environment.
And as always, Safety One Source is here to support you every step of the way, providing you with the resources and information you need to stay safe and informed. Until next time, stay safe out there.